Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, writers, smiters and firelighters, welcome along to the Joe Spiver YouTube channel, or welcome back, where we discuss books and little else. And today, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Last time I berated David Copperfield with an ostentatious extent, and unfortunately over the weekend, soberly and dismissively, in full possession of my mental faculties, I quite literally threw this Penguin Classic, very fine edition of Dickens' narrative, David Copperfield, across my bedroom because I was so displeased with it and I couldn't get behind any of the character development. I got to the point where the manipulative and yet initially sycophantic Uriah Heep is supposed to be, as I say, manipulating Mr. Wickfield and essentially bending him over his knee and making him do all sorts of other things. I just was not getting behind it. I was made to care for David Copperfield, who obviously gets an unlawfully large amount of treatment in this book, and yet I not only was I not in much sort of mental and emotional coordination with him, I knew nothing about him whatever. And so I put it right away. But it did get me thinking about, and I alluded to this last week, just quite how and why Dickens has become so ubiquitous and so well respected. And I think, I'm not altogether sure, but there are certain theories surrounding the cultivation of his own celebrity, and how he became the darling of the Victorian literati, which seems to me a perfectly consummate explanation of things. There is also his works being weekly and monthly published in the penny papers, so that a working class, which allowed him to permeate a working class readership, so that a relative pauper could pay somebody a really small amount and have their work read out. And so the spread of his work was more severe than a person who we may look at much more endearingly today. Things of that nature. And also in response to, as I say, my admittedly quite harsh and some would say dismissive censure of Dickens, some of you told me that perhaps I wasn't quite in the right state of mind to read David Copperfield, which to me seems arrant nonsense because, I mean, what does this concern? This concerns a hard done to, misplaced, occasionally aimless, but also quite committed young man who goes through the hands of many and wants nothing but to make a decent career for himself, is reasonably bright, and holds some personal allure, and it concerns the insuperable vicissitudes and tribulations of that person. And I know of no other literary precept that would pertain more to me than that. And so if any of Dickens' works are ever going to work on me, it is this, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm afraid, as I say, it did not. And so I shall try. I mean, Christ, it's not going to be difficult. This guy, clogs all sorts of used bookshops left, right, and centre in this country and beyond. And so, unless I continue to blaspheme, I'm just going to continually keep butting heads with him. Again, I've been told that his magnum opus supposedly is now Bleak House, although this was described to me as his magnum opus, which is why I chose it. So I shall attempt to read Bleak House at some point, and no doubt come to YouTube and reflect my thoughts. But yeah, not a good one. It was a bail. My first bail on a book in a long time, 18 months at least. I've read works on the history of the Principality of Monte Carlo. I've read books on Asian mould. I've read books on terribly long biographies on theological figures. I've read all sorts. I've read the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus by Wittgenstein. I've read all sorts of gnomic and altogether unhelpful works, and I've managed to get through them, but I can't get through that. So, sorry, Charles, but you're down. But today, ladies and gentlemen, we have something. I'll just take a quick sip of water. We have something much more alluring. We have the 1855 novel The Warden by Anthony Trollope, who was in many ways Dickens's compatriot and contemporary, and not quite rival, but somebody who was working at the same time as him. And this is his 1855 book, where our eponymous warden, Mr. Septimus Harding, presides over, in the village of Barsetshire, or in the village of Barchester, the sort of maintenance, hospitality, and wellness of 12 beadsmen. This hospitality and caring premiership has been going on for a good couple of hundred years, a good 400 years now, since Mr. John Herman left a note in his will to say that all sort of superannuated workers in the town should be cared for, and he lived where now the hospital is in Barchester, and he saw to it that a warden would be able to, as I say, care for these 12 old people, give them hospitality, give them a bed to lay in, some food to eat, etc., and a small tributary income as well. So that's where we start, that's where we begin. And what soon becomes apparent, so it's a novel, I think, typified by investigations into sacrifice and scurrility and the normalisation of unfairness, and how time and our deference towards particular institutions can sometimes obviate or blind us to, as I say, unfairness and disproportionate inequalities and things of that nature. So we have Mr. Warden, who is small, as you might be able to see here. This is a lovely picture from Charles Spenceley, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Charles Spenceley. And you can see here, that's our eponymous warden. He is small, tender, timorous, and yet still with a bit of that kind of jaunty, ancient vigour that comes from pleased people who happen to be 75. He has a very fixed and secure moral compass. We are led to believe, and has made sure also, very crucially, that many of the beadsmen have actually been supplemented, have had their sort of little wages and all of their hospitality supplemented by him being a much better human being. So they're actually doing better out of the will than they know. But then we have his son-in-law, who is the Archdeacon Mr. Granty, who obviously is married to his daughter. And he is just as kind, but a person with a larger proclivity towards sort of, what would you call it, religious ideology. He is not nearly as well as tempered. Obviously, he's a younger man, and he is much more assertive in his belief rather than Mr. Septimus Harding, who is, as we say, Grantley is more standoffish, and Mr. Harding is a little bit takes a back foot rather. And then we have, all of a sudden, it is inquired of by, frankly, somebody who must be described of as a busybody, Mr. John Bold, who also who's the potential suitor of Septimus Harding's other daughter, Eleanor. Susan is married to Grantley, as we've already discussed, whereas the younger daughter, Eleanor, is set to be married to Mr. John Bold. But Mr. John Bold is, as I say, a busybodying reformer who wants to root out injustice in many of its manifestations, and that's what he does. He believes wholeheartedly that the £800 a year that Septimus Harding receives as an annuity from John Herman's will is not so much morally repugnant, but just wrong, and something that needs to be. It is an apportioning wage that needs to be righted, and that's the premise of the novel. So, essentially, word gets around rather quickly, and the reason that I referred to it as a novel that investigates scurrility is because Trollope very, very, very well talks about the preeminence and emergence of the free press in London. So he he satirises the Times newspaper. In here he has it called the Jupiter, where a story soon breaks out about Mr. Harding, in which he's told of as the beautiful passages that talk of him being some kind of stealer of the poor's bread and some kind of pauper whipper and some horrible human being, when in fact he's just trying to do his duty in the name of God. But it just shows how quickly a story can be perturbed through the national newspapers, and accurately depicts how much public opinion is informed. There's an excellent chapter in this book called Mount Olympus, whereby, again, Trollope very accurately ironises on the weird veracity that just some random editor is given when he writes a piece, which, again, speaks fluently to our times. And so what very quickly happens is it's very quickly discovered that there isn't much of a case for Mr. John Bold. Mr. Grantley seeks the consultation of a London lawyer by the name of Mr. Abraham Wayward. Again, it's that awful atronomic, those awful atronomic tendencies of Victorian authors which try and essentially shirk the workload and mean that somebody's name becomes more instrumental rather than the descriptions of that character. But anyway, you have Mr. Abraham Haphazard, who is the lawyer, and he soon finds a loophole in John Bold's case, meaning that essentially Mr. Chadwick and Mr. Harding are both just mere servants of the will and employees of the will, and therefore cannot be tried for any misappropriation of funds or poor distribution of funds. And so it quickly becomes clear that this case against Mr. Harding will not stand up in court. But essentially, what I enjoy most about this novel, firstly, it's written gorgeously and beautifully, and it intends to be occasionally humorous, which is Dickens' avowed aim, and I don't think Dickens has ever been nearly as effective at humour as Trollope is, even in this very short exercise here. And as I say, quickly it becomes clear that Mr. Harding is never going to go down for receiving a wage of £800 a year, which I think equates to about 50 or 60,000 in modern day money. So he's not, as I say, rich beyond the dreams of avarice. He's just doing quite well and is wealthy, and the land upon which he sits has also increased in value since the publication of John Hearman's will, but that's besides the point. But as soon as the Jupiter article is published and Mr. Harding reads about it, he starts not to care how others interpret his being unlawful or a felon. He cares not for what another person will think. All he wants to do is feel right within himself. And so gradually you get this really, really nicely spun story of how unnecessary it is at heart for Mr. Harding to be so benevolent and righteous to his detriment. At one point, Mr. Grantley gets so annoyed at him and says, "For goodness, your passivity and your epithet of being a passenger is actually amounting now to cowardice," because it goes into all sorts of the history of the church and things, and is really, really lovely. So I've absolutely loved this, and if Dickens is good for anything, it's for I don't know, what would you say? Realigning your readerly perspective so as to make it obvious that there are much better writers out there. Essentially, whatever you read after you read Dickens will probably be excellent. And yeah, I've really, 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 really enjoyed this, and I've got 3 passages that I highlighted and I want to read out just so as to hopefully convey some of the beauty of what Trollope writes. So we have our first section here. This is go at humour. So obviously we have the Warden and we have Archdeacon Grantley, who are ecclesiastical people, and he deals with their reputation both publicly and privately in this paragraph. So we have, and I quote, "Many of us have often thought how severe a trial of faith must this be to the wives of our great church dignitaries. To us, these men are personifications of St. Paul. Their very gait is a speaking sermon. Their clean and sombre apparel exact from us faith and submission, and the cardinal virtues seem to hover round their sacred hats. A dean or archbishop, in the garb of his order, is sure of our reverence, and a well-got-up bishop fills our souls with awe. But how can this feeling be perpetuated in the bosoms of those who see the bishops without their aprons, and the archdeacons even in a lower state of dishabille?" So, it talks about the bedroom habits of priests and things of that nature, which is lovely. And then the second part, which I wanted to reiterate, was Dickens' laying out of the archdeacon's children. So we've got 5 children, 3 young sons, and within this novel, they're not much. They have not much significance, and so the question begs why on earth he went to such limits. I imagine, given that this is the first novel in the Barchester series, he goes on to talk about it. I've only ever read Family Parsonage of this series, so I'm not too sure, but he talks about Archdeacon Grantley's 3 sons, and this particular one is called Samuel. It's about half a page, so I hope you enjoy this as well. But perhaps Samuel was the general favourite, and dear little Soapy, as he was familiarly called, was as engaging a child as ever fond mother petted. He was soft and gentle in his manners, and attractive in his speech. The tone of his voice was melody, and every action was a grace. Unlike his brothers, he was courteous to all. He was affable to the lowly, and meek even to the very scullery maid. He was a boy of great promise, minding his books and delighting the hearts of his masters. His brothers, however, were not particularly fond of him. They would complain to their mother that Soapy's civility all meant something. They thought that his voice was often too listened to at Plumstead Episcopi, and in the house than either of them. There was, therefore, a sort of agreement among them to put young Soapy down. And then later on, to speak the truth, Samuel was a cunning boy, and those even who loved him best could not but own that for one so young he was too adroit in choosing his words and too skilled in modulating his voice. So there's a little bit of an argument against precocity there, but again, so well set up and so gorgeously done. You as is the case with Trollope in everything that I've read, even the guys and girls who essentially only come just to pour the drinks or to rearrange the cards or to fix the boiler in the morning. All of the minor characters seem to have third dimensionality in and of themselves, and seem to be people that you would happily learn more of. And then our final section is just something on. This is on Eleanor Harding, who takes it upon herself to who avails herself of her romantic closeness to Mr. John Bold and to say, look, mate, my dad's in bits over this, okay? Can you? I know it might well be beyond your control, but can you please put a stop to this? He's done nothing wrong, and he's probably willing to give up all sorts of his annuity just to stop this scurrilous rampage by the Jupiter. Please, can you? And it just describes Eleanor Harding's deportment and her perception by others. So she, though her sister, the Archdeacon's wife, had spoken slightingly of her charms, Eleanor was very beautiful when seen aright. Hers was not one of those impassive faces which have the beauty of a marble bust, finely chiselled features, perfect in every line, true to the rules of symmetry, as lovely to a stranger as to a friend, unvarying unless in sickness or as age affects them. She had no startling brilliance of beauty, no pearly whiteness, no radiant carnation. She had not the majestic contour that rivets attention, demands instant wonder, and then disappoints by the coldness of its charms. You might pass Eleanor Harding in the street without notice, but you could hardly pass an evening with her and not lose your heart. And I think that evocation of the not necessarily prepossessing woman, but somebody, as I say, in whose society you just completely think of yourself as a complete fool and want to know more about them. So that's The Warden. 1855, so we're continuing in our chronological order for Victober. As I say, really, 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 really loved it. It still has all of the key tenets of Victorian literature, so it's occasionally self-referential. So it isn't jarring when it features authorial intervention. When Trollope actually comes in and says, "Oh, next in our tale, you'll meet this person." So it makes it very obvious that it's a novel. But that isn't jarring like it is in Dickens for some reason. I'm not quite sure why that is. I'll have to investigate closer. It is obviously humorous, as I've said. It challenges social milieus and mores, which is what supposedly the whole gig is supposed to be about, and is another advantage that should see it a lot more often in schools is that it's wafer thin. This took me a couple of heavy sittings to go through, prolonged sittings, and it was done. So I much enjoyed it. So that is Anthony Trollope's The Warden. I would assume that lots of you have read this anyway, because this is the start of his most famous series, and so something that And also just something to mention, I think it's Katie at Books and Things did a guide to how to read Trollope, and she asserted that perhaps this novel was off-putting to most first-timers because it was somehow filled with religious nomenclature and was all about religious politics and church politics. Now, the first page is a bit dodgy, but I didn't really get that, so I would hope that you're never put off by this. It isn't confusing. Trollope does what all great authors manage to do, which is to condense and make digestible some quite complex themes. The plot is fairly simple, but at the start, in a lesser author's hands, you would feel confused, but you are not. So that's Trollope's Warden. And just so you're made aware of my next read, we are continuing along the chronological trail. I have 1862, 1863, I believe, George Eliot's I'm going to go with Romola, given that it's set in, I believe, Florence, at the unification of Italy, set a couple of hundred years prior to 1860, whenever she's writing, but Middlemarch just completely ran me over and had me reeling for days and weeks afterwards, and so I'm hoping that Miss Eliot did the same thing with this, but we yet to find out. So again, thank you. I have to say I am completely astounded that you believe just these random rants, perorations and ramblings by Joe Spivey are somehow interesting and subscription worthy. So thank you all so very much for all of your comments. Please keep them coming. Do you like Charles Dickens? What is it I'm missing? Am I, as I said, how is it that a person of such preeminence and the subjects of such idolatry for many scholars and many of my friends of repute, why on earth is it that a man who is synonymous with English literature does nothing for me? Please tell me what it is that's going wrong. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.